Hear the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to John. A certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see light in this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I will let her awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit, and was deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man and kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus, having looked upwards, said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you will always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and the face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what Jesus did, believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord. So please be seated. There are times looking around in the world, we can feel overwhelmed. I've just been to the Somme, to the battlefields, with the Veterans Association. And I went there last year. It's a lot to take in, a lot of information. But it's not just information, it's also emotional, because it's hard to understand. Not just hard to understand from an intellectual point of view, and the numbers are plain enough. It's hard to relate to what's happening, or what happened there. It's hard to, if you like, feel for it, because it is so overwhelming. It's hard to, if you like, feel a sense of place about how big everything was. There's a slight tendency now for people to exaggerate some of the numbers and some of the things, and as one of our members, one of the actual guides said, he finds that irksome when they do that, because he said, everything is so awful already, why would you need to exaggerate it? And yet Jesus would say here, this illness does not lead to death. We went to a cemetery where there are 44,000 men buried. 44,000. That's 7 times the size of Brynmawr, just in one little patch of ground. You can't really understand that. You can't really take it in. And gradually it kind of sinks in. And then you look around to and fro and you see more of it and more of it and more of it. You think, what on earth happened? And yet Jesus would say, this illness does not lead to death. Because even though these men are dead, their bodies are buried. They're not beyond what he can do for them. But more than that, you look around and you think, what on earth made this happen? What kind of disease of human nature actually brought this about? You know, what kind of malaise in the population actually made this happen, brought this to be? And yet Jesus would say, this illness does not lead to death. And then you might reflect on some of the individual characteristics of it, you know, the arrogance, the spite, the pride, the vanity of some people which motivates them. And within that you get the crookedness, the vindictiveness, the deceitfulness of some, the dishonesty. And yet Jesus would say this does not lead to death. You might say that none of these things of themselves are necessarily the end of everything. We do not need to be mastered or overcome wholly by any of these things, neither the great, if you like, illness of human nature in us as a whole, or the badness that is in each one of us individually, or the badness that's in any other person around, however horrible or obvious or malignant it might be, nor even the fact that all of us are in fact mortal. All of us have to face this fact. There is nothing we can do about that. And one day all of us will face this ourselves, let alone with people that we know. And yet Jesus would say this illness does not lead to death. This is a remarkable story. But when it happened, when he first received the message, either at that moment when he received the message or shortly afterwards, he must have known that his friend Lazarus was already dead. There was no way that he could go and prevent it. The sisters were quite right in saying if he'd been here, you could have done something. He was absolutely right. But he wasn't there. And yet that was not the end. He could not have, if if you like, he couldn't have made the journey quickly enough because by the time he had the message, it was already done. So there's no way, he wasn't simply, if you like, dallying so as to bring about this thing. It had already happened. And so why did he dally? Why did he wait? He says, so that they may see the glory of God. He says that there are 12 hours of daylight, and those who walk in the day do not stumble. So he reckons that he's in the light, he's not stumbling. He's considering what to do. He knows that he's going to go and wake him up. He knows what he's going to do. And he knows why he's going to wake him up. He knows that it's because he wants his friends to see it, and he wants Mary and Martha to see it. And he wants this to be known. There's one theory, one reason that he waited, and without making it hopefully sound too calculating, because there's a kind of sense that if someone has just passed away, if you just hear them sigh and then that's their last breath, then, if you like, for that moment, they might be resuscitated. Sometimes we're deceived. Sometimes someone, if you like, comes back, or it turns out they're never really gone after all. But if after 4 days, well, there's no chance of that. And so, part of the reason for the delay was so that he could make it absolutely clear there was no other explanation for this. I think there's a kind of hint of that in the story of Sarah and Abraham. Because by the time their child was born, Isaac, they were so old, both of them, that there was no earthly hope at all. They were both utterly spent. They were both completely beyond all natural expectation of childbearing. There was nothing in either of them that led to the idea that they would become parents. And yet it happened. It happened after all earthly expectation had gone, I think partly to make it absolutely clear that this was not a natural child. There is no way this could be a natural child. The story is echoed in the stories of Rebecca and Hannah and Rachel, who all struggled to conceive and to bear children, but all of them bore children in their youth, when it was, if you like, natural. So they had a momentary affliction, they were delivered from it, and they bore their children to their happiness and their satisfaction. But those stories in which the women suffered the humiliation and the pain and the sorrow and the grief of that were temporary afflictions, and they knew a resolution. But their children, their births, were not as significant as the birth of Isaac. And the nearest analogy to that would be the birth of Jesus. Because there's no human way possible Jesus could have been born, because Mary, as she says, had not known a man. She'd never been there. And so, therefore, there was no way this could be anything other than an extraordinary birth, a supernatural conception. And so this raising of Lazarus could not be anything other than an extraordinary event. There is no way it could be anything else. There is no human resource available. There is no human hope left. It is utterly gone. That idea that everything is gone is in that reading from Ezekiel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is lost, we are cut off completely. That was, if you like, a sense of despair in the people. A sense of despair in the population of the Israelites. Ezekiel was writing to the Israelites in exile. When you read the beginning of the story, it says how it's by the Chebar River somewhere in Mesopotamia. I'm not quite sure where that is. Near the river Euphrates, I think, or somewhere like that, what we now call the middle of Iraq. And so the people there were scattered and fragmented. They were conscious that they were scattered and fragmented. They were conscious that they had lost their statehood, their nationhood, they'd lost their autonomy, they'd lost their part of their sense of identity as a people. They'd lost all of it, most definitely not. But a part of it had gone when they lost their homes and their families and they lost their place. And part of their sense of identity was based on their place. So what was left when they've lost their home, when they've lost their land, when they've lost their situation? And they were helpless. They were vulnerable. They were subject to an arbitrary authority set around them. They were vulnerable to the people around them. And so they said, our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, and we are cut off completely. What do we have left, he said. What do we have left? What hope is there for us? We have nothing left. And the contrast offered there, the hope offered to them in that passage, is ridiculous. I mean, in a way, it's preposterous. It's almost comical. The hand of the Lord came upon me, and he brought me by the Spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. Well, it's almost a kind of joke scenario, isn't it? And they were very dry. Dry bones. There is no life in these. There is nothing in them. Absolutely nothing. One of the themes running through this whole passage is the idea of the wind or the breath. Because there's different words in English. It says by the Spirit of the Lord, and then it says prophesy to the four winds. And then it says I'll cause breath to enter you. And in Hebrew, all those words are the same word. And so that theme runs all the way through it. Somehow all these things are interlinked in the ideas of the author. The breath of the Lord. He has brought me by the breath of the Lord and set me down in the valley. He says to the Lord, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you. So I prophesied, and there was no breath in them. And he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy to the four breaths, O breath, and breathe on these slain, that they may live. So he's talking about a physical reconstitution of all these people. Talking about drawing their bones together, clothing them with flesh, but there's still something lacking. They still need something else. They need breath to enter them so they may live. And there's that emphatic phrase, so they may live. So they may live. And the Lord offers them this breath so they may live. And at once it's the idea simply of breathing. And as I read this passage, you can almost imagine someone lying there unconscious and suddenly going spluttering, then waking up, and then coming up and getting up, and breathing again. But he's not just talking about that, because when it says to some of the Israelites say their hope is lost, they're the living people, of course, aren't they? They're the ones that are grumbling. So this hope that he's offering to them is not just a hope that one day their relatives will get up. He's offering something presently to these people. He's saying somehow they lack breath. These people who are saying our hope is cut off are somehow lacking breath. They're lacking life. This lack of hope is a lack of life itself. There's something more going on here. The psalmist speaks of that sense of despair. Out of the depths I've called to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Out of the depths of despair, the depths of fear, the depths of pain, the depths of illness, the depths of whatever it is they're deep in. When they feel overwhelmed, when they feel utterly helpless, they feel there's nothing left for them to do. There's nothing that they can do for themselves. They feel utterly powerless. But the psalmist is also conscious that there is something wrong with him, that he needs forgiveness. If you, Lord, were to know what is done in this, who could stand, he says. Everyone has got something wrong with them. Because if the Lord was going to be particular about every single little thing, there'd be no one left. But he says, there is forgiveness with you. Forgiveness. He's conscious that he's not actually worthy of the Lord hearing his voice. He's utterly without anything, and yet he's also conscious that there's no reason for the Lord to feel obliged to him. But he's not without hope, he says. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits for him. In his word is my hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than the night watch for the morning. That desperate sense of longing, of waiting, of desire, of need. And yet it's not without hope, because he hopes in something. Even though the psalmist feels unworthy, even though he knows he's unworthy, he knows he is not without hope. Why? How, when there is nothing left, when we're not even worthy of the attention, why is there hope? He says, O Israel, wait for the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy. The word there in Hebrew is chesed, which means, I think, something greater than simply mercy. It means loving kindness, steadfastness, gentleness, generosity, loyalty, faithfulness. It sums up all these things. It's a really hard thing to translate because all these things come together in this one word. So in the Lord there is goodwill to us. There is faithful kindness to us. There is generosity of goodness towards us. And he emphasizes that, saying there is plenteous redemption. Plenteous, there is abundance. The Lord multiplies, the Lord greatens, the Lord pours out, excessively almost, redemption. Notice it says redemption there. He's aware that he needs something. He needs to be, if you like, bought back. He needs to be forgiven. He needs to be delivered. He needs to be saved. But he knows where it's going to come from. His hope is not that he is somehow worthy of it, or that he has earned it, or that he can master these things himself. His hope is in the goodness, the loving kindness, the generosity, the gentleness, the greatness of the Lord's grace towards us. For it is he who shall redeem Israel. It's curious how it says from all their sins, because in Hebrew it simply says he shall redeem Israel from his sins. It's like he personifies the whole nation as one individual, but that one individual shall receive that goodwill, that kindness, that generosity, that grace, that mercy. And so he has hope. He does not despair. He knows there is something greater. He knows, if you like, this sickness does not lead to death. He knows that whatever comes, there is deliverance. There is something greater than all the evil around him. And so looking out on the battlefields, you might say there is something greater than all this evil. There is something greater than all this death. All the evil which brought this thing to happen. All the evil that these men brought with them to the battlefield. Everything can be subordinated. There is something greater than all these things. These things in themselves do not triumph. So when Jesus came, if you like, hinted at what would happen, he told his friends, he says, I'm going to go and wake him up. And Thomas came and makes that remark, let us also go that we may die with him. I don't think the disciples really taking in what's going on. But they know there's something going on. And Thomas says, let's be part of it. Let's go. Let's do it. I want to be part of this, he says. And that's a good thing. But there's a kind of curious thing. Why then is Jesus so upset if he knows how it's all going to work out? Why is he so upset? Why is he so grieved? Why is he so moved? I think it's because he has compassion on all these people. He sees their despair. He sees their weakness and their fear and their sorrow. He sees all these things. But also in coming out there and seeing the tomb itself, he sees his own death. He sees himself one day. He too one day will face this, and he too will have to go through it. And he knows what that's going to be like, and he's not looking forward to it. But he also knows why he's going to do this. He's going to do this because he has compassion on us. That all the things around us overwhelm us, all the things that might cause us to despair, he is going to be the one that will overcome all of them. He is going to be the one that will say to all of us, this illness does not lead to death. No matter what attacks us, no matter what assails us, no matter what terrifies us, or no matter what threatens to overwhelm us, he says, this does not lead to death. This is not the end. I am greater, he says. I will deliver you. I will come and I will lift you up. I will breathe on you and enter you, and I will lift you up, and I will cause you to live. In spite of whatever has gone before, or whatever is going on around, or whatever actually happens, he says, I am greater, and I will raise you, and I will cause breath to enter you, and I will cause you to live, because I can do this. Therefore, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He stands himself in contradiction to the whole despair of everything that goes wrong for us. So whatever lies ahead, whatever has gone before, whatever is around us, we know that our Redeemer lives. We know that he is kind and good and gentle towards us. And we know that he is greater than all these things. And I know as we look around us, there's a temptation to despair at times, to think, how is it the world is so crazy at times? How is it so mad? How is it so many things are going so badly and so wrong at the moment? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by it. But we can also know that there is someone greater than all these things. Someone who will triumph in the end. And this is the one in whom we place our hope. So therefore we can be at peace. We can face these things. We can deal with them. Because we have a friend who is greater. Who is our friend? Jesus.